The end scene with Stephanie and Michelle, basically telling, I don't want to ever see you, Mom, please leave. How did you approach that scene? Because it was such an it was a key emotional moment for me in the movie.
Writing-wise or directing?
We'll start with the writing.
Oh, yeah. Writing-wise, I knew that in order to make this story feel believable, we had to have Stephanie fully reject her mother, finally, because it didn't feel right. We didn't want to make it an easy battle for her to regain the love and trust of her daughter after all the pain that she was put through, and so that was why that moment was really important. That moment when she says, "I am so tired," was there's multiple levels to that, but one of the things I'm so tired about the relationship, and then hopefully just the context of it is like we're also tired of this chaos, this life that we're living, and so yeah, I'm very proud of that moment. I'm glad you're calling it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to directing it. I remember when once we wrote it, it felt like, oh, we finally have something to move towards and aim towards with the whole movie. But it was so scary until we shot it, and until we found Stephanie, and meeting her and talking to her about the scene. I felt like so much more confident it would work. And then on the night, we didn't do many takes. Like, we talked about the scene but barely rehearsed, so that they could kind of go there and we just be ready to capture it, So what you see in the movie is like we did 4 takes total, 2 on Steph, 2 on Michelle, and it was just like, such a relief when they nailed it. Yeah.
So what was the biggest challenge? You had the wonderful book. What was the biggest challenge when you're structuring the screenplay to distill what goes in and what goes out into your screenplay?
I mean, there was just so much in that debate in the book that I had to part with, so I think making sure that it moved and had momentum and felt like a thrill in terms of the tension while still maintaining the complex ideas that Miriam goes into in the book was probably the biggest challenge.
Did anything evolve on set where you, as a director, you're like, ooh, this isn't working, can I go back and rewrite?
Many times we would come up with things or find things collectively through our shared lived experience with crew members as well who would contribute, and we would shift and change scenes in the process, yeah.
The movie, there was a little hiatus between the 2 films. When you first sat down with the script, what was very important for you? We have to honor the first movie, but at the same time we have to make it our own little story for today.
I think Joe and I wanted it to be a soulful ride. And not just popcorn, but actually have some emotional resonance that would kind of give it, I don't know, a weight that the other one did have, but just in a different way. So I think that was the thing, and I think the other thing was for the action sequences and to be unlike anything you'd ever seen before, and working with our technical advisors from the Navy, who was just such a huge piece of all of it. Creating those sequences was something that was a real challenge, but Joe and the crew and everyone just did such a spectacular job with it.
What I found, I loved the action was amazing. What actually struck me was more the heart. So obviously it starts with Tom and Miles, the father-son relationship, let's call it. How did you and Tom, what was Tom interested in? I really want to make sure this is part of it, or how did that process develop?
I mean, it was all sort of like when this started to happen and coalesce, it was all driven by, can the movie, does it deserve a sequel? Can it kind of, does it have the weight and sort of the emotional critical mass to sort of justify making a sequel? And so it was all coming from an emotional place, because otherwise it's just, it is what it is. So yeah, the emotional component of the story was huge. Fathers and sons were huge for us. And telling a story where Tom's character, Maverick, was sort of coming to terms with his own obsolescence, was something that, as a writer, you're constantly struggling with. Am I still relevant? Do I still matter? And so I was able to channel my own vulnerability.
Our last question is, of course, the Val Kilmer scene was one of the most emotional scenes of the year I've seen. Writing it. When you first saw what you wrote on the screen, how did you feel?
I can't take credit for that scene. That scene was Val and Tom, really, and so I wish I could, but I'm not going to. So, it was incredibly emotional. I think it surprised even me in watching it. And it's a testament to, the power that relationship holds over time. So.
Well, you can take credit for helping bring movies back to the movie theater, because this film saved movie theaters. And so thank you for being a part of that.
It's an honor to be part of that legacy, man.
This movie actually obviously deals with the grief of King T'Challa dying. How was it for you as a writer actually be able to explore grief through different characters' lenses, and they all had a different reaction to it, but actually as a dramatic story in a Marvel movie?
Well, that's a great question. We looked at all the stages of grief. Once Chad passed and we had wrapped our head around how we were going to go forward and how grief was going to be thematically what we were exploring, how to get over grief. We explored and researched what those stages were and how various people have dealt with it, and we really tried to look at our characters and say, okay, how would this particular character approach, how would their loss of Chadwick change them? How would it affect how they move forward? And we just tried to move in that way with each of them. Yeah.
I was really struck by the scene where Shuri finally gets to go to the ancestral plane, hoping to see King T'Challa, but you flipped it where she is more in line with Killmonger. So dramatically, how was it for you to be able to go that way, show her darker side, also of course bring her back, but for you doing that setup dynamic, how was that for you?
It was great. We wanted Michael to be, we knew Michael was going to be back in the movie, right? But we wanted the scene to have some narrative significance and be meaningful. And her journey of grief and trying to kind of overcome that was one that we were kind of calibrating along the way, trying to make it work so that it felt earned at the end when she actually was, where you didn't know what she was going to do when she had Killmonger. And one of the ways to try to, tweak that was, one, to have her mother pass away, and then where would that take her? And Killmonger seemed like the perfect person for her to see once she had gone in, because he really did represent that other point of view of vengeance.
Now, the other part of the Marvel, which we love, I've spoken about before, is the indigenous world, a real world, which I was so impressed that Marvel allowed you to explore a real culture in a way that I've never seen before, accurately and stuff. How was that for you with the research part, but actually be able to incorporate this whole new world and also different character points of view too, not black and white villains?
Yeah. We tried to tackle it similar to the way we approached Wakanda, in terms of starting with a grounded, real indigenous, history, and then extrapolating out from there to incorporate it within the cinematic universe. And Marvel is, they've been nothing but supportive in everything that we wanted to do with the films, and so there was never kind of a question. This is something that Ryan had thought about and wanted to do before we even really delved in. He wanted to expand the kind of Black Panther universe, and it was great. We had, a wonderful consultant, Professor Aldana. We had really an entire team of people who were helping us to ground it in truth. And then, and for me, you're learning as you go along, and it's just a really fun experience. I learned quite a bit on the film.
And the great part for me was that the fact he just wasn't a cartoon villain. He actually, his point of view made sense. And, and it's not so black and white, which I thought made it interesting for Shuri. Is that kind of fun for you as a writer? You really get to explore the villains in a way that a lot of films don't let you explore the villains as real people.
Yeah, we look at them as antagonists, not villains. And one of the ways of making them, I think, more grounded is to have them have a point of view that's a very substantive one, and one that is relatable. We tried to do that with Killmonger, and obviously, we try to approach the same with Namor, and we feel like it works. It's part of the fabric of Black Panther movies now.
I was very fascinated by your episode. It seems like animation now is allowing for adults to explore story much more in the past. How do you feel about this as a writer, being able to tell more adult stories than you would not been able to, let's say, even 20 years ago?
Thrilled. I mean, I have grown up, I've written on live-action animated shows for years, and I loved them, but it was always like a gag every second. That was the goal for an animated show, and people didn't think that sophisticated adults can enjoy animation. I think that's been changing, not only with Undone, but things like Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio that just came out. But we think of it as just another medium, a beautiful medium, and it's like this is the next evolution, is trying to make animation that's like as good as any live action drama that you could see. And hopefully, but the thing with Undone is it could also be weird and out there and do certain kinds of effects and play with reality in a way you could kind of never even do in live action easily.
And I was struck by your episode because I like the fact that you can do past stories, 1930s Poland, for example, but also dealing with trauma, memory, and trauma. How is that being able to explore these kind of very serious themes in a new, interesting way that I've never seen before?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm thrilled you actually watched the episode. Yeah. Being able to visualize what was inside your mind was a thrilling thing to do, and took a long time figuring it out with Kate Purdy and Hisco, the whole thing, the director of Undone. Like, there was a lot of conversations we all had about the nature of reality and memory. So it was really cool.
How has it been for you being able to write this theme, but in a very comedic way to shine a light to it, but through character?
I mean, I think from the get-go, the mission was to make a comedy first and foremost. So, we did a lot of research from the very beginning when the show got picked up to series, talking to teachers, principals, people who, like chief operating officers of entire school districts, and just to get sort of a lay of the land, right? And then we could, once we had all of that information, we could just go and do our thing and make it funny. But first and foremost, we always wanted it to skew more heavily towards a comedy.
So since you actually, the writers and actors, blend over, how does that help you in the writer's room as a more of a collaborative team than maybe other writers' rooms?
Well, it's a double-edged sword because Quinta is the crossover, right? So she is the creator of the show and a fellow executive producer on the show. Basically, we have to start the writers' room really early so that we can have Quinta for as long, and not early in the day. Like we start at like 10. It's great. It's great. But we start like earlier, like in April, so that we can get Quinta in the room with the rest of the staff, because once we go into production, we pretty much lose her, right? So, I mean, that's not to say she's never in there, and she's constantly like reading scripts and giving feedback, looking at cuts and that whole thing. But really, the key was to have her as early as possible and sort of bank as many scripts and ideas and that sort of thing that had her stamp of approval before we went into production. And then it was like smooth sailing.
As a writer, how do you feel when those 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds start improvising your scripted scenes?
Well, I'm fine with it. I feel sorry for our first assistant director who's just looking at their watch saying, oh my God, we lose these kids in about 2 hours. So I'm fine with it because most of the time those kids come up with some pretty incredible stuff.
The show obviously tackles a pretty serious issue, underfunding of education, and sadly our society ignoring education, especially in inner cities. How is it for you being able to tell this story, obviously in a comedic way, but to have it through character? Did you actually tell a serious drama as well as a comedy?
I think it just starts with us putting story first and seeing what happens. Every time that we do that approach, we're able to fill it in with like the specificity of the real world and what it is like in the lived experience of teachers. And all that just comes from those really rich characters that Quinta was able to come up with, and that we as a room have been able to just like take over and keep running and keep adding layers and layers and layers.
Speaking of the room, what makes this writer's room special?
Man, what makes this writer's room special, I think, is the environment of it is so fun. It's like genuinely a healthy work environment, which I think in entertainment and outside of entertainment is a rarity. It's just a lot of people that have fun doing what we do and want to keep every space that we're occupying as writers and for the cast and crew and everyone as positive as possible, because it's a hard job. Like people don't talk about it a lot, but it's a pretty time-intensive job and a very stressful job. A lot of decision making on the fly. So the better you come in feeling, the better you're going to be able to handle those stressors.
So how do you feel? I asked your colleague the same question. How do you feel when the 5-year-olds start improvising on your scripted words?
I mean, 5-year-olds are going going to be 5-year-olds. I think that's a good thing about the show is that, we try to have the characters that are children, get to be children in the script and in real life. When, kids are acting up and just have a lot of energy, that's just because kids act up and have a lot of energy, and that's not going to change because we're making a television show.
So maybe it's a good question. Card Counter is one of the most amazing films I've seen in a very long time.
Thank you.
And it was a wonderful script. What was your initial reaction when you read your part?
When I first read it, I was like, what is this? I don't understand. I had to read it again. And then I was like, yo, this is unique, different, and a challenge for me. And I'm here for it. Plus, there's a sex scene. Gotta do it. Never done it before.
And
Was that your favorite part?
Of course.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
But so as someone who is a writer and an actress, how does that help you as an actress feeding each other as kind of as an artist?
Well, challenges always make me grow, right? And to work with Paul Schrader is such an honor. And it's like basically taking a class, and getting writing, directing one-on-one. We rehearsed every day. We made changes to the scripts. I didn't make any changes. He made changes, and I fell in line. And it was a great challenge. And I feel like a great, what would you call that? Like a speedy class to how to write and how to be creative and think outside the box, but also keep it grounded in reality.
Do you want to write parts for yourself, or would you rather just not, when you're writing a script in the future, would you rather just focus on the script and not on the acting part?
When I'm writing in the future, I would like to focus on the script, but make sure that it's doable by the actor.
Question for you, what was it about the sandwich shop and this whole story saying that made you want to be a part of the writing team?
It wasn't so much the sandwich shop, it was Chris's writing. When I first got the pilot, it was so cool. It was just such a good script. And it had so much specificity and in ways that didn't care that I got it. And you had to get to the end to sort of fulfill some of those questions in a really beautiful way. And so, yeah, I knew exactly that this was a job for me, and I clawed for it, really.
I find I love the show. It's also pretty dramatic. Yeah. It doesn't shy away from the drama. The backside, the suicide. I mean, we start with that. How do you feel be able to tell a dramatic story, but also in a comedic way?
I mean, it's something that I've always loved to do. I think Chris did a fantastic job of never pushing for never reaching to elicit an emotional response from an audience, and really just getting into character and allowing that to drive the scenes and building worlds and moments for them that felt powerful to them. Yeah.
So looking back on VEEP, what was special about that, working with those writers in that writer's room?
We were able to improvise so the writers could witness our voice and use pieces of what we said in rehearsals. I also think we were empowered to get inside those characters, and they respected our take on characters, so it was they wanted to hear our take on stuff. And then, the casting, Julia, sets a tone, and Tony and everybody was remarkably generous, and there was no jerks, and so that made it exceptional too. And I think we were lucky that people cared about it. I always knew the show was going to be excellent, but we were lucky that people loved it as much as they did.
Did you run into some issues toward the end of the show when the comedy you were doing became reality?
I think that's why they stopped doing it. It was what became a crazy fiction turned into a sobering documentary, as I think Julia said in her Emmy speech.
So my first question for you is, what was your initial emotional reaction when you read the pilot for Fresh Off the Boat?
My initial reaction was, this is not getting picked up to series. Not because the script was bad, but because at the time, there wasn't anything like it. Hollywood did not make shows like that. And I thought it was so good that I was like, there's no way. There's no way this is going to go on the air. So it was a pilot that that I ended up doing, and I thought, this is going to be it, and it'll be great. We'll make a pilot, it'll be great, the experience will be great, and we'll just leave it at that. And God picked up the series, and before you knew it, we were 6 seasons in, and yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So generally speaking, as an actor, what are you looking for in, especially, let's say the TV writers room, what are you looking for in the story, but as a collaborator, what are you looking for in TV writers as a skill? Because my students want to go into TV writing, actually.
It's a good question. I mean, I think for me, it's just it's specificity. You know, you bring in specificity, and that always makes things so much more interesting. You know, like even if it's like something weird and out of the box, just bringing that in. When you find those little nuggets in a story, it just feels so like, I don't know. That specificity is what makes it stand out.
That's what actually I love about Fresh Off the Boat, because we've not seen this kind of story before, and I felt like it was about time.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, and it was about specificity. That, you know, it was a very specific perspective that hadn't been done in a long time, and somebody had the guts to write it, and because that person had the audacity to write that script, it happened. You know. Yeah.
Now, my last question is it still, on the flip side of that, how fun is being part of the Marvel Universe?
Oh my gosh, it's the best. It's great fun.
They do give you a lot of good fun parts to do in it.
Yeah, and once you're in it, it's like you're always in it, which is like amazing.
We only got to touch on it last time, a little expanded. For you obviously had the short.
Yes.
When you were mapping it out with Al, what was the challenges of trying to branch it out? You know, was it beat sheets? Was it index cards? What was the initial structural challenge of expanding it?
The structure, it was just an outline that we kind of worked on. I mean, kind of a very loose outline of just beats. You know, we were looking to follow the tropes of all of these biopics, so the blueprint already existed, and it was our job to kind of color outside the lines a little bit so it wouldn't just be a predictable cookie cutter biopic. But we many movies before us had mapped it out. It was kind of taking that structure and then breaking it and putting it back together.
As a collaborator with Al, was it good having something to bounce off each other? Could you guys rein each other in, for example? Both of you? Did it good having that sounding board where you both could push back on each other a little?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially the way that, once we completed our outline, the way we broke the script up, we broke it into a bunch of different chunks and, made the agreement that we would have no ego about it. We can rewrite each other. You could fight for something that you love if you want it to stay in the script, but ultimately, unless we both agree on something, it's not going to be in there. And but it was great just having him, especially. I mean, as a comedy writer, Weird Al was such a huge influence on me. I mean, he helped develop my sense of humor when I was young. So it's sort of a bizarre experience, getting to write a movie with him.
Now, when I saw Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe, 20 years ago, and when I saw 13, everyone which were wonderful roles, I thought they need to do an Al Yankovic, Madonna love story. That's how I saw that 20 years ago. But what did you see?
Yeah, I mean, the two of them were such perfect choices for something like this. We really wanted to lean into the drama. We're like, we have to find dramatic actors that are going to also have a funny bone, get what we're going for, but not try to push the comedy too much, but really lean into the absurdity of this script being played dramatically.
Of course, everybody knows the story. We've read it, but there's something different about seeing it dramatized and visualized. How was it for you being able to actually show this to the world, what actually really happened, and actually move people?
I am a writer myself, and I always say that art has the ability to knock down people's walls and create empathy machines and shape culture. So the fact that this film was being made, got made, included survivors in the process, I felt it was such a bastion of hope for how we can do things moving forward. And I think Rebecca did a beautiful job of being very honest, telling a really honest story, but including all of the complication and the empathy that's required when talking about the process of a survivor going on the record.
And that's why I felt authentic was the word I used, because without the survivors' involvement, it would have felt not real.
Yeah, I agree.
And did that help with the research part too, where we actually be able to explore that and build into the character?
Yeah, I think so. I actually run an organization called Hire Survivors Hollywood, and our whole aim is to ensure that people who come forward about abuse are not pushed out of the industry. And it unfortunately happens a lot, but part of that is making sure that when survivor stories are being told, that they are included in the process. And it creates that authenticity that you speak about. So I think people responded to that. I had strangers reach out to me on social media and tell me how seen they felt by the film. And so I think Rebecca and Maria and the entire team did such an incredible job of being honest and authentic while also making a really entertaining film.
All right, so there's a lot of research involved and a lot of horrific stories to sift through. What was the challenge of kind of distilling all the wonderful research but moving it into a narrative screenplay?
Well, initially I worked without the book. They were writing the book whilst I was writing the screenplay for about 8 weeks. So I was kind of free fall, but I'd met the journalists and I had a lot of information and the article. And my concern was to make it very much from their point of view and to keep it incredibly female. So I was putting away swathes of material that didn't serve that, and to keep it as a very authentic story, to keep true to it. We were pretty accurate. We took about 2% artistic license.
Well, and given that you're dealing with survivors with a painful thing, it must be really important to make sure there's accurate for them.
Absolutely, and that they were happy with how they were portrayed and that they felt held by us, because it's a huge thing, not just to be in the book, but to be seen on screen, portrayed. It was huge.
All right, so the big question for you is, what are the challenges when you're structuring a show that has multiple timelines? Because the characters are in different places, throughout the show. What is the challenge when you're mapping out the season for that?
I feel like the biggest challenge is making it all good.
Yeah, that's always the case. A lot of people think, why don't you have 2 rooms? Why don't you do, the teenage storyline and the adult storyline? But the problem with that is then the stories won't necessarily talk to each other. And the key, whether or not our audience kind of knows the weeds of it, the specifics of it, those stories have to ping pong off each other in a really resonant way, or else they won't feel what we hope they are feeling.
Do you feel like you have to track it, track the characters multiply and almost like index cards, like this is where they are, this is where they are?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're gonna track a variety of things, and I think the entire process is always a toggling between sort of tracking and looking at the macro, but then also staying in kind of the micro and just making sure that the moves that you're making and the ways that you're having things come together have the feeling of something that is kind of exciting and kind of interesting.
So Saul's been around a while. How is it for you kind of really ending his journey?
Oh, it's very sad. I've been working on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul for the better part of 10 years, 12, I don't even know how long, 2010, 13 years. So yeah, it's amazing that we've had such a great run. It's very sad to see it come to an end, on to new shows and new things. So,
but it must be great being able to actually have 13 seasons to really dive into his character.
Yeah, I mean, between both shows, it's been great to develop Saul Goodman. We didn't know what we had when we had Saul Goodman on Breaking Bad, but to spin this off into a whole new show and under Vincent Peters' great leadership, it's been fantastic.